queries, right? Just retrieving data from the database. We'd like to be able to also add data to the database. So let's play around with that as well. So I'd like to be able to save new data. So to do that, the repository provides a function called save. Save will do an insert. Just like all the finder methods will do a select star and will select from a database, a save will do an insert or an update, depending. Right? If it's an object if it's a record that doesn't already exist in the database, right, it will do an insert. But if it's an object that you have first retrieved from the database and you're manipulating it, and then you do a save on it, it'll know that this is a record that already exists in the database, so it'll do an update. Right? So save is smart enough to know whether this is a brand new record or not. Okay? So let's try it out. Let's do a save. So let's do here, and we'll create a new user. Notice that we don't have that constructor, so let's create that constructor. So create constructor int. Well, actually no. Let's have one that I don't want the integer. So first name. So maybe Dan Brown. Maybe that's we'll do maybe. So this will be username, password, and then Dan and Brown. All right, let's do that. Let's create that. Create constructor. There it is. We'll probably also need the default constructor now that we have overloaded it, right? So user, and this will be username, password. This will be first and last. And this will be something like this dot username equal username, this dot password equal password, and then this dot first name equal first, and then this dot last name equal last. All right, excellent. So on the test, we have instantiated, and then we can just save it, and that's it. All right. All right. So let's try that out. Let's make sure that Dan is not already there. Let's refresh. Okay, Dan is not there. Let's run this. And presumably it must have done an insert. There's our insert, right? That insert, that's the prepared statement that I used to create the insert. And if we refresh, there's Dan. Okay, so the insert is there. Okay, excellent. One more. Let's see. We can also update. For instance, what we could do is to first find an existing user. So for instance, we can say test public void test update user. This might be something like user Alice. We can use the user repository to find a user by ID or find user by username. And we'll grab Alice. Now we have Alice, and then we can manipulate Alice. We can say Alice.set first name. We can change it to Alicia. Okay? And once we've changed it, we can then save it back. We can say user repository dot save Alice. Right? Okay. So let's try that. Let's run that. So there's Alicia, select user, let's see in the database. And here's Alice. And if we refresh, Alice is now Alicia. And Dan was inserted again, right, because of the test. It just keeps inserting Dan multiple times. So notice that for this to work, actually some nice magic is actually happening, right? When this Alice object is retrieved from the database, it looks like any other object, Alice, right, with all the setters and all the getters, and you're manipulating the object, but it's actually not your user, right? This user object, it's actually a dynamic class that gets generated for you that wraps around your object that has exactly the same name, right? To make you feel that you're actually working with your user class, okay? Instead, it's a wrapper class that has exactly the same name, it has exactly the same interface, but the setters and getters are slightly different, okay? So that, for instance, when you do a set first name, like we're doing here, it keeps track of whether the object is a dirty object, meaning something happened to the object. Right now, the record that is stored in the database and the object that lives in memory are different from each other, right? Where they're supposed to be the same, right? So that it keeps track of which fields changed, so that if it has to do an update, right, it can do an optimization, so that I know that only the first name changed. So that's the only field that I need to update if I go back to a database. Right? So that's a very common design pattern of creating wrapper objects, right, to keep track of the life cycle of a managed object. So this Alice here, this Alice object here is referred to as a managed object. Right? It's not just any object instance. Right? It's an object that is special. Right? It's being kept track of by the infrastructure. The infrastructure is keeping track of whatever you're doing to that object. Okay? So that if you modify it and then you do a save, right, this actually works. Right? This will become much more important when you have objects that have relationships with each other. Right? So for one object might have a list of other objects. Right? So that if you add to the list of objects, child objects to a parent object, it needs to know that, hey, you added to the collection of children. It needs to go back and do a whole bunch of inserts. Right, for all those children that you added. For instance, you have a website, and a website you add pages. Yes? So in Java, right, they'll be represented as a list or an array of object instances of many pages that were added to a website. Yes? But it needs to keep track of that, of which one did you insert. You know, it had 10 and you added 5 more pages. It needs to say, oh, you added these 5 instances. At some point when you do a save, it needs to know that it needs to do 5 inserts for those 5 instances that you added to the collection. Make sense? But it knows to do that because the top-level website object is a managed object. If it's just a website that you instantiated using new website, that's not a managed object. Right? It has to be an object that it retrieved from the database, right? And it's somehow connected to a database. And now it has a memory representation of that object that lives in the database. Make sense? Right? So Alice here is a managed object, right? Because we're fetching it from the database. Okay, and it's keeping track of anything you do to Alice here. Make sense? Pretty good? Yes?
What if I don't call the save function?
Then the database will never know that you changed it.
And the data in the memory has
It changed. Yeah, it changed in memory, but you never synchronized it with the database. So now the object in memory is out of sync with the database.
and it is just discarded at the end.
Yeah, at some point when you leave this curly bracket, it's gone. Yeah, you lost it. Yep. You would have to find it again, right, and save it at some point.